One of the perspicacious editorialists recently said that she felt like we were in liberal society of America in the position of the English troops who evacuated at Dunkirk. Well, I see it maybe a little differently. I don't think we're so much on the run as embattled by what we don't know. Now, I'm not exactly Prairie Home Companion. I doubt anybody's going to be able to sit through this whole thing, but I want it to exist. After World War II, William Shirer pointed out that there were a number of professional researchers who were just amazed at how many captured enemy documents we had, warehouse after warehouse full of them. And they were going through them in attempts to understand what had happened in World War II when High Command decided to send everything back, as though they were tired of knowing what was going on, you know. And I suspect that this video will have the effect on a number of people. It's going to be in a series of parts, so you can watch part 1, part 2, part 3. But of tiring people out. You know, I'm going to try to put some thanks to the very few viewers I know I have at the very beginning, so they don't have to play a role they may not want to satisfy my ego that somebody went through it. But I think it's important that it exists and that it not just be scrubbed from the record. My primary concern, of course, is in a personal sense, is that my father was murdered by the people I've been investigating. And I wonder how it could possibly be that a professor of higher learning emeritus at Bethany College, retired from the University of Pittsburgh, and naval veteran, could be abandoned by all, and no one look into what was done to him. Because by saying, well, this is about you and what was done to you about me, they're ignoring, they're using the way people have been made to feel. The video goes into how that happened about me to besmirch his name sufficiently that people don't bother looking into it. Now, one reasonable and rational complaint about this video is that it will seem to touch on a large number of issues that seem to be disorganized. That's the reason why I started with a vignette about captured documents, is that a person who goes through it, maybe in a more systematic, organized way, and picks through things and looks for connections between them, and draws arrows and flowcharts over the material that I present, might be able to do a better job of crystallizing things. I'm not saying weeding things out, but crystallizing things. You might think, well, this sounded so disorganized. Why was it so disorganized? The reason it's organized haphazardly is because I wanted to get to it. You know, I can only study these notes for so long before I have to start, you know, recording. If I was to type all of this up, my carpal tunnel is already really pretty serious. I'm having, you know, spasms and so on. I have to give my arms a rest. It's bad enough that I'm doing this with the fans off for your, you know, benefit in terms of the audio quality. Now, I am deaf, and YouTube has stopped seeing my videos for some mysterious reason, so I can't go back and appreciate my work, which is very frustrating. So I may get around to typing some of this stuff up and putting it in my blog, storychecksout.org. Now, where this begins, I think, is in the question of what sort of agency would be capable of going about putting a stop to concern about a murder of a senior officer by mysterious weaponry by enemies and blowbacks that phase from the Great War, World War II, who are looking for conquest of America through the proxy identity of being our friends. You know, when Kennedy died, there were not riots. And one of the ways they forestalled riots was by lying about what had happened. So if they hadn't lied, or people had figured out what had happened sufficiently soon that there were riots, maybe instead of waiting 3 years for the problems in Vietnam to start up, Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King would have lived longer, maybe even still be here today, because they would have been more careful. They would have seen through what was happening. Robert Vaughn toured with JFK and then went on and made The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And evidently Bobby Kennedy, seeing these episodes, which were a campy satire on what was done to JFK, ignored the implications, didn't realize that it was part of the signaling community that had put together the Warren Commission and the laws about Oswald, who was indexed to Oswald Mosley, the leader of the British Union of Fascists. So what is this signaling community? Do they still exist? What does it mean that we have a signaling community of this sort? Now, when we get into the idea of a signaling community that's murdering our leaders, they're obviously doing much, much more than that. They're a tour de force system that controls our national identity and issues what we now call dog whistles. Now, dog whistles has come up because Trump refused to repudiate white nationalists. It breaks my heart that Trump is sick. He was reckless and a danger to himself and others and needs to be voted out. But I don't want to dwell on that. I wish him a recovery. There may be certain theories about what's going on with all of this that need to be put together over time. For now, everybody who prays, pray. Everybody who's atheist, please calm yourself if you don't like him and give him your best. He's a human being. Now, enough about that. When he went into office, he also gave out a dog whistle, something about grabbing women by the pussies. And this is a concept of the way that some elite, closed groups with a lot of power and money and leverage test the loyalty of the women on the inside circle to their companies. And it was clear from the vote that many women do not disapprove of this sort of test of loyalty, and they're willing to serve as gratuities. My point is that they called this a nature of reality sort of a dodge. And so who's giving off dog whistles all throughout our communities? You know, somebody told me they couldn't be my friend because of the powers that be. What is this powers that be? Okay, when I was at Pitt, somebody used to use, for reasons that were lost on me as a child, instead of saying conspicuous, they would say conspicky. And it was just, I thought it was their linguistic mode. You know, I have linguistic modes. People tell me when I speak in Pittsburgh language that they don't understand what I'm saying. You know, so the Voice of America of Miami University, based in Ohio, has a motto, Prodesse quan conspici. And what that means is to accomplish without being conspicuous, which you could translate, if you actually knew what they were up to, into getting things done by being underhanded. And yet, because they call themselves the Voice of America, they are a loyalty test to people who are in the whisper campaigns, which is another word for what they're saying. Prodesse quan conspici basically means to go forth and do backbite to those who disagree with you. And the system that put this together is nationwide and probably international. And it's important to understand who they are because they're playing a sporting game with issues of ethics that you might call Godball. Who gets to speak for God? You know, and the thing is that they're murdering people who've served our society, and many of whom, if they weren't murdered, would be thought of as good people. In the lead up to the murder of my father, there were a number of things that you can rationally dismiss. You know, I was in neurotrauma still. My father apparently did not know anything about that. And the Jewish community did. And there was a kid who sort of hustled me into agreeing to paint. And he was my superior at the school because he went to school there. And he got into it with the manager because he wanted to go to sleep before we started painting. So I rested too, and then we painted. But there were other things, like a bat was found in my father's bed. He got a visit from Ford. And I recently got a smoking gun autograph picture from Clint Eastwood, who was a friend of Redford. And if you go into my semiotics, you'll say, well, that's interesting. Wasn't there 6 Days of a Condor, a film about the Day of the Jackal, it was called, where all of the CIA was working on the symbols in publications to figure out some super story, some ground plot that was going on. It's supposedly fiction, but in fact it's reality. They changed 6 Days of a Condor to 3 Days of a Condor. It signifies 63. And, you know, Redford semiotics has a lot of things going on that index to the situation, even at the governor's school with the RAs there, where I went, that could be put together in a hexagram. Like, everybody knows that Penis Gabriel really came after me. I had upstaged his super lewd, evil, demented, Warhol fascist attorney, Amanda Harcourt. And she wanted blood. She still does. She wants to execute me. She was behind the execution of Cersei Kennedy because I loved her and didn't even know she existed. And this served as a metaphor to them for murdering, you know, that I didn't know John Lennon was going to be assassinated. This magic show of shell games and slippery images and stuff. And they execute Cersei Kennedy to it. So obviously, the Kennedys themselves have been only so helpful. They refuse to look at the themes that connect the things that Robert Vaughn was doing when The Man from U.N.C.L.E., the way that Jackie Kennedy was positioned in the limousine. Anybody who studies it closely now knows that she was probably one of the assassins. And that's the way the women in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. operate constantly. And they started that up right after she did it. So they're hiding that Cersei Kennedy was murdered. But we know that she was. And we know that these hardcore Warhol people were doing it because they have mobilized Lenin tribute around the AIDS victims, whose actual perpetration group they are cooperating with. So it's, you know, Lenin's purpose in staging this magic show Double Fantasy is pretty clear. Clint Eastwood used to call Where Eagles Dare, When Doubles Dare. And of course, Ian Fleming had a book, You Only Live Twice. So it was when they're slipping back and forth from reality to, you know, Hollywood voodoo, it's important to them to pull this kind of thing off. But Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head has been used by Robert Redford and Penis Gabriel. And it has a number of signifiers. A man whose feet are too big for his bed is symbolic of Abraham Lincoln. He died in a bed that was too small for him. You know, sleeping on the job. One of Cho, it's a comic community calls Asian girls who's was clearly working with Gail Burstyn and the pornography culture, that UW Dialectics has positioned to make, song and dance about my personal capabilities as a lover. My girlfriends never complained to me, but their ex status led them to sort of shift allegiance, especially when Paul McCartney got into the game. Hands me this thing about, let's see if I can get it on the screen. This can all be a little confusing because it's about Mysteriological, purposely causing a problem by going to sleep. Sleeping on the job, the kid who wanted to sleep before we did the murals, and she uses the international pronunciation methods. So it's Messianic, and which has Miami hidden in it as a pun. So, what they're suggesting is that something that I think changes things a great deal, because it allows them to give this notorious idea that I fell asleep on the job when they were using Svengali methods of neurohypnosis and neurotrauma. They impacted a coma to put me to sleep, and then they snap them fingers. They wake me up to this new, brave new world of where they are the voice of America now. And, they say, oh, he hears voices. In 1994, after Midori performed I Siciliani Vespers, I sure did. I had a key snap right out of my head. The newspaper was full of strange stories about teleportation. It was the Barclay Havel showed up of some sort. So, the belief that education can help America resolve some of our difficult and nightmarish issues depends on the at-risk reading, listening to something like this, and understanding what is being reported. Because I guarantee these Voice of America lunatics hair split over every single word. They take them as points of departure for terror attacks all around their country. And so they sort of have already won, but there's a weakness in what they've accomplished, and that they define themselves as rational. They define themselves as the good guy. And the way that Trump fornicated the idea of him being smart, he was the brilliant one, don't ever tell me who's smart, is part of their con job, that they are the true educators. So I'm trying to put this to rest with what is essentially a twin apparition. What I mean by a twin apparition is that there's an overlapping of Miami's Voice of America, based in Ohio, with the underlying theme of these British, with all of their mayhem from various Pink Floyd agencies and so on, in the rock and roll, crocodile swamp, that is based on Bertolt Brecht's idea of man as man. This is their walrus concept. The easiest way to explain man as man, which was the title of one of his plays, in German, Mann, ich Mann, is to show its fallacy. The principle that he espoused in write-ups and summaries says they take a soft-hearted, kind, generous person and turn him into a raving lunatic who will kill at the snap of a finger, proficient in his duties, a monster. And so, oh man, judge not, let you be judged. Man is man, K is C, black is, a new argument about all of this. So, what's clear is that all you really need to do is disagree with it and see the fallacy that's at work. And what is that fallacy? The idea that they should challenge the soul with a mysterious hero pass is central to King Crimson's rubbish. They created in the area where my father was murdered their own school. It's not accredited. My mother calls it the School for Magic Dances. She loaned me her car so I could go there. But the idea that you could turn a civilized person into a deranged pig, that you can get America to cheer the murder of Circe Kennedy as protest against the people who killed JFK, which is vomit bag lie, and is based on the concept that you can break a slave, for example. You know, and you should prove this experimentally at major universities. You should take someone and make them a slave and break them. I mean, they've used me shamelessly. The lack of shame, the shamelessness is something I may get into eventually to talk about, particularly where it comes to the NAACP. Okay, but as I say, this is about human character, and since it's from Germany and Europe, we're talking about a, you know, a play that was popular in the 30s, 40s, 50s, maybe 60s, of people who like Bertolt Brecht, but it was an important concept in the idea that, you know, any slave can be broken, any man can be turned to hate. But here's the fallacy in all of that. It takes a great deal to break some people. And yet there are people, in fact, that is so easy to buy that even these brilliants themselves laugh in disappointment at the thought of it. The self-hatred of cynical lawyers who can't ever contradict, like the Pennsylvania Bar Association's nostrums, is a very good example. And it's very difficult to find in some quarters professors who would gladly and willingly torture a student to prove the idea that man is man. And yet there are also places where they fight for the grant from Voice of America. Yes, I want to be the one to do it. I know how to torture to change somebody. Oh, if he's conscientious, that makes it all the more brilliant what we're going to do, and so forth. But the mysteriological catch in all of this is the hidden mountebank behind all of it. You see, this is an important conclusion I've reached. It's that it's much easier to get a lot of knowledge about something than it is to crack the code of what's at work in that knowledge. And I really have to thank one of my friends, John Pisa, for tipping me off about the Voice of America from Miami and Ohio, because it gave me a lot of information I already had about what's happening here in Tacoma.